Today, many people are unaware of great gains that African Americans have made over past years. For example, we have African American as a president of the United States of America. African Americans were once enslaved. African Americans have successfully moved over segregation and exploitation, but they did not win a complete victory for true freedom yet, because they still experience discrimination in American society. A large amount of exploitation of African Americans took place in America in early ages. The history of African Americans in US society starts when they were brutally enslaved by Europeans. It all starts when Portuguese started their journey to Africa to gain a gold. And they found a lot of resources in land, but they were not satisfied with just the resources. So they soon targeted African Americans. And those poor African Americans have been taken away from their home. It is surprising to think that these leading nations were competing against each other for gaining trade over human beings as a slave. Europeans exploited African Americans as a means of labor, and for their own economic wealth, they used men and women of African Americans to develop their economy. As a result, Europeans developed a lot economically, but Africa lost many things and they underdeveloped in terms of their economy and everything. As prominent Guinness historian Walter Rodney, his work was cited in Book of Asante's African Americans. The massive loss of the African labor force was made more critical because it was composed of able-bodied young men and women. Many factors like hatred against African Americans contributed to creating a stereotypes and bias. Europeans' tendency to only value their own tradition and prohibiting African culture led to early formation of stereotype and bias, which led to later segregation and discrimination. And some early behaviors of African Americans also created this early formation of stereotypes and bias. As African Americans were forced to work, being unfed, they may have been hungry and they stole some food, but people stereotype those African Americans as being a stealer. I think that this stereotype is unfair because it's Europeans who exploited African Americans in first place. Even though being freed from enslavement and slavery, African Americans still experienced a lot of sly and crafty segregation. As Civil War Trust website says, the Confederate general surrendered to Union general, and African Americans were of course very delighted to hear such a news. However, it was not an end for them to fight for equality and freedom. They had limited opportunities and was treated differently in every aspect of life. They had to use different water fountain and swimming pools. It's really upsetting to think that African Americans who lived in the same society as whites were treated differently. If in slavery and exploiting African American is a direct violation of human rights, treating them differently is an indirect violation of human rights. With efforts of many courageous people, the significant step was taken to end segregation. In 1950s and 60s, conditions for black people were really bad. However, some special cases initiated civil rights movements. For example, Rosa Parks refusal to give up her seat for white men initiated the civil rights movement. As we can see in A+E Network's website, Rosa Parks' refusal actually initiated the civil rights movement. I really respect her for not giving up for what is right and fighting for injustice. And initiated by Rosa Parks' case, Martin Luther's speech, I Have a Dream speech, inspired a lot of people and flourished the civil rights movement. With this many important national events, it was possible for shift to happen from segregation to where everyone receives equal treatment. As there was laws prohibiting segregation, people today might think that African Americans have come a long way and they have won a complete victory. But I think that winning a complete victory is only when American people's attitudes and minds against different color of people changes. Today, the discrimination exists. Some people have negative attitude toward people just because of their race and color. As we look at the social problems, discrimination, we can scientifically approach this problem by studying social problems, especially the reading who makes them. We need to take up viewpoint of strangers and distance ourselves from what we already know about discrimination. As African Americans have come a long way and developed a lot of freedom, they should be proud of themselves. They came from the time when they were working for white people without being paid to the time when they were treated unfairly and getting disadvantages to the time where they almost have freedom now, except the fact that some ignorant people are having discrimination against African Americans. This exploration reveals that a lot of freedom has been achieved and all of us can be proud, but we as a society need to pursue to win complete victory for true freedom. With efforts and time of our generation, we can create an ideal society where nobody receives unfair treatment because of their race and color. It takes time and effort, but it will be accomplished.